welcome back. Another day. Ooh, bellows, which have now been sanded, cleaned up and stained. They look lovely. And as I said before, I'm going to use gravity, that steel weight in the top. And you can see, even with it just resting on paper, it takes a while to close. And the motor's going to lift them up with a spring and a stop, so they don't risk damaging this really fine, amazing sort of fabric type paper stuff. During the meanwhile, how exciting! There's a flute. In fact, it's going to end up like that. That's painted up beautifully. And there's the right angle thing. That's a funny little bit of, that's just masking tape to make sure that when I glue the bellows on it, actually does stick properly. I'm so pleased with that mitre joint idea. That worked really, really well. So there's one, and there's another one. I'm going to, because it's the silver paint, even though I sprayed them last night, I'm going to leave it to set for as long as possible. Next thing, I think I'm going to turn the bung that fits in here, that changes the pitch. I know I've got more of this pipe, so I can practice with that without touching these. This is my chosen bung plastic. I think it's polyethylene or something like that. It's slightly waxy, so it slips nicely within the acrylic tube. So I'm going to, I think about 20mm long, and then that just need to turn it down so it slides easily and doesn't stick, but equally is as airtight as possible. There's the drawing, very pleased to have discovered. There's a short bit of tube just to test it. Here's the piece that I've now turned down to 17.7, and look at that. That's beautiful. It doesn't stick. It's big enough and tight enough to block the air, and because I've said it's 17.7, it's going to be 17.7. Now, well anyway, to cut a long story short, I'm going to put this back in the lathe and then part off the two that need to be 21mm long, if they're a day. And there we have them. Beautiful. It's taken so long, but oh, it's just so lovely. Machining something like this and then beveling the ends and tapping and drilling and this and that. It's very, very satisfying and most enjoyable. And there we are. They're not going to stick, they just move beautifully up inside. Shame they're not seen really, but needs must. Right, now the next thing to do is the Scotch yoke. So walking the dog the other day wondering, is a Scotch yoke or the thing in the middle a crank or a cam? And I think this is a cam follower, just a funny shaped cam follower, which I just remembered is still on the computer, the drawing. So I'll get them cut out. I think 3 pieces of 2mm, so you get one either side and one in the middle, sort of. They're ridiculous. 10 minutes later I finally found it. I found it last week and put it in a safe place. Brilliant. Now, there's the strip, and it's not beveled, and I can't find anywhere that sells beveled strip, because obviously the bearings are V-bearings, so it needs something to keep that aligned like so. So I feel another jig coming on, a beveling jig. There we are. So that goes on the pillar drill, the wonderful pillar drill again, so many uses around the home. And then that runs along there, and I think I used an abrasive wheel or possibly a milling cutter just to take it off. I'll see what I've got, get it sorted out, clamped down. I thought I'd try a 4 flute milling cutter, but just feeding it through with finger power, it just shakes and judders all over the place. I'm not going to use that. I think that's why this hole is so big, because it's going to be using an abrasive wheel. Right, that'll do nicely, as you can see, catching the light. It's now turned it into a V thing. Abrasive wheels, perfect. Now, my stomach is telling me it's lunchtime, so after lunch, if it is lunchtime, even if it isn't, I'm going to have lunch. Who cares? I'm going to cut out and make those bits, cut this to length, and then the idea of the hole in the end of that is that so it gives it a little bit of movement, which is important, whilst pulling and pushing it. Lovely. Right, I've got the cut to length. Got 3mm hole drilled in one end. It's all coming flooding back now. Here's the 3 separate parts, and that sits on there. That's slightly rebaited. It's with 0.1mm apart lines. So if you, well, there's one 0.1mm line, and it just makes a nice little etched sort of effect. If you put about 10 together, you get a slightly wider effect, slightly deeper as well. And you've got loads of them together, you can even get a really quite accurate rebate. And because this brass is just wider than 2mm, that's right, and this is 2mm acrylic, if I put that on there, this then sits flush with the top. And basically, one step further, if I stick that on there, I end up, if it's done neatly, with an L. I can then push that in and screw in. Oh, amazing. And I'd even thought of putting these nut cutouts on the back so that it grips them and it doesn't protrude out the back any at all. So I'm very pleased with that, and I was thinking, jigs, I found these two vague memories. Couldn't figure out what on earth this one was for, and then it came to me, because I'm going to stick these 3 bits together with super glue, I want to make sure they're absolutely smooth. So you turn it over, that stops it from shooting down into the sanding machine, and you can just touch it up and sand it, or with some wet and dry or something. So that's good. And then the final jig is this one, and that one lines it all up. So I can put each part on there, put glue on, and it'll make sure they're all accurately aligned. How very exciting. Although I have to say, marking out one of the screw holes with my centre punch that I thought would fit through the hole didn't. So I pushed, pinged, and it's cracked it. So just cutting out another one. Never mind. I'm not going to use the sanding machine actually, that's just too violent. I'm going to use a bit of abrasive paper on a piece of plate glass, which I know is absolutely flat. I've got it the right way around. Then I can put that like that and do that. And that'll just roughen up the surface to make sure that the super glue actually adheres well, and that there's no little raised sections around the cuts or anything. And there we have it. That's absolutely fine. Yeah, good. Well, I'll get on to the other bits. So you put a bit of glue on, and then, making sure you get it the right way around, you put the next layer on. And the bearings ensure it's all going to line up perfectly, and the rough surfaces ensure it's all going to stick really well. I'll hold that for a little bit, and then I can lift it off and wipe off any excess glue that's squeezed out the sides, and my fingerprint that I've just glued onto the front. Fantastic. Another abrasive disc the same day. Absolutely perfect for just sanding around the edges and getting them all nicely smooth. It's most enjoyable. That's it. Once I've done the outside, I've then got a slight problem. I'm trying to remember how I did it. Obviously this was stuck together on 2 bearings, and they're exactly the same bearings as I need to roll freely up there. Now they're spot on at the moment, they're 13mm bearings, so this probably needs to be 13 1/4 or something like that millimeters. I haven't got any sanding drums small enough, so I'm going to have a think about that. Oh, by the way, there's my set. They're not very expensive at all, they're ever so useful. They really are. I've just looked in my abrasives drawer, which funny enough includes taps and dies. Anyway, I've just found this piece of dowel with a piece of abrasive paper stuck in it, and I think I remember lots and lots of flapping going on, so I'll give this a go and see whether that works. As I say, you don't have to take very much off it, it just is tight at the moment. Is exactly 13, so just over 13 should do it. I'm always really impressed by this Rexon pillar drill. Really am, been thrilled with it. I wish we'd had them in the school I used to teach at, DT department, because for a start it's got a lovely big rack and pinion, so you can't loosen it and drop it on your foot, and kids can't actually lift it because it's so heavy. You just wind it up and down, which is safe as well as really usable. Also, really clever is the chuck. And I got my technician at the time to try and find one of these, and you couldn't find them anywhere. They're not available at all. It's got a spring in it, and that is fantastic, because one of the other things, health and safety in schools with pillar drills, is obviously you mustn't leave the chuck key in there, because then you switch it on, it flies out. So we always had them tied on with a bit of string so the string would break and slow it down so it wouldn't injure anyone. But it's such a simple and effective way. So if I try and leave that in, it springs out. Isn't that fantastic? Very clever idea. And it looks like this is working perfectly. I've just gone around it a couple of times, and now the bearing does fit. I'm just going to do it a few more times to make sure it doesn't stick. Right, getting them sprayed up. It's strange, it looks very shiny and golden brass to me with my eyes, and it looks sort of brown. Oh, how odd. Anyway, while that's drying, I'm going to start fixing signs on. Whee! So that's the first one I'm going to fix on there. And I've got that, which is going to go along there, hopefully, if the holes line up. I've got this one, which explains what the functions are. It's going to go on there. And last but not least, I need to glue a lens in this, because that finally ends up hovering somewhere like that, magnifying the actual number that you're looking at. And to fix this on, I'm going to be using these little star things. I got them for something, and they actually break it up really nicely. All the other screws are cross-cut brass, and this looks nice. It goes really nicely against, and this has finally made a comeback. There we are. That bit that's been sitting drying for days. So, and the other thing worth pointing out, I realised a long time ago, these are the holes that I'm going to be screwing into, and you can see that they're slightly triangular. And if you make a triangular hole so that the screw just bears on the straights a little bit, it's almost as though you've tapped it. You don't need to tap it at all. That will just go straight in there and screw in really nice and tightly. The best laid plans. Thought I'd get gravity to help. I line this up with this hole. It's got to line up with that one, and that line up. None of the others do. And I rested this on. That and that line up, and all the others do. So somehow this is all correct, and these are in completely the wrong place. Arrgh! And I don't think I can get them to fit at all, because there's no plastic under any of them. Oh, sod it. What a shame. So it's not the engraving, it's the actual gear itself. Yeah, there's no plastic under any of these ones. Need to go away and have a think. What a pain. What I've decided to do in the end is glue a block of acrylic here to fill this gap, because the screw hole lines up. Is it 5? No. Just, oh yes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3. For those of you eagle-eyed or remotely intelligent viewers have realised that actually there's 5 holes in that and there's 6 in this. How that has happened, I really don't know. But anyway, I've glued a block in here, and of course, even though it was lying flat on the table, it was sticking forwards. Then I managed to use the top of the sanding machine just to sand that flat. I can now tap a hole in that. These two, they missed so slightly that I'm drilling them out to 7mm, and I've got some 7mm acrylic rod that some of you may recognise from the chronograph wall clock kit. It's the pendulum, it forms the mercury, pretend mercury. I'm going to glue them in these holes that I've drilled out to 7, and then I can drill and tap new holes. That means it'll be supported that one, that one, that one, that one, and that one, and these two, which line up over these 2 holes. It doesn't matter, I'll put screws in and nuts on the back, but that'll be quite enough support. Right, 6 and 5, how very strange. No idea. Makes your nerves bad doing this. One slip. It's not one of those James Bond huge devices they had to take to pieces really carefully without slipping. So I know, because I've done it so many times, and how we laughed. One slip of a screwdriver, scratch that, have to start all over again. Oh, I think that might be one of the reasons I'm using these star screws actually, because theoretically, and I'm not actually going to say that because that's just tempting fate, but they're going together nicely. That's the main thing. Right, I'm tired. I think I'm going to stop for the day because I'm really going to look forward, or really looking forward to tomorrow. There are the two signs that I've got fitted onto each one, and there are those bits that are sprayed up and painted, and the brass rods all cut to size and angled and holes ready to put together, and then they will fit on there once the bearings have been adjusted, so that's exciting. And here are the viewing windows with the lenses that I've just dripped glue on at the back. Remember I said about not touching them. If you touch them, then that's what creates the white misty stuff, so I've really been careful not to touch them and got air free flowing around them as well to help. And there's even these two bits which are now sprayed up, which support the viewing lens and just go around the number dial and make it look really interesting, so I can put that together tomorrow. And thankfully, because I've worked everything out and there's nothing else left to work out, I should be able to get a good night's sleep with a bit of luck. Oh yeah, and of course there's the cuckoos, which have been spent all day drying, so they'll definitely be ready for fixing together. And the bellows onto the cuckoo sounders, and the plungers onto the end of the brass rods. It's the next morning. These are now dry. You can see, or set, can see why this stuff, superglue, is used in crime scene investigations, because I wasn't aware I'd even touched the back of this. Obviously, you saw I was very careful not to touch the lens, but even this engraving, I must have just picked it up once off the laser cutter. You can see it's picked up sort of traces of fingerprint. It's amazing. It doesn't matter because it's on the back. Amazing stuff. So, exciting day. Get them on, get them together, and suddenly realised whilst walking the dog, I might even be able to get the whole thing done. I'm not sure, but there's nothing to stop me putting the clock face on, getting that painted up. In fact, it is painted up. It's all just ready to go. I haven't put it on yet because I was concerned about getting it damaged and things. And the cuckoo, oh. Right, onwards and upwards. And look, I'm so pleased with this design. It is so enjoyable when you get something that really works well. There we are, cut out for the nut there. Flip it over. I'm not actually going to manage to get all the... Oh, no, oops. The camera on, oh well. Slide that in, and there you have it. I'm so pleased with that, it works beautifully. I haven't bothered painting the back because it won't be seen. You can just see how it all works and fits together. As I said, the original one was all sitting on the front or the back and it was lopsided. It was always sort of pulling it over, which didn't work at all. Having it like this means it naturally, with the extra little weight at the bottom, naturally hangs vertically, which is great. And there we have it. So there's the Scotch oak and there's the plunger, and you can see it's got a little bit of movement just to reduce the need to have the whole thing absolutely parallel. So if the slight angles or changes, this can wobble around a bit, which is important. Oh, misses. I've got that on. And that looks lovely with this little curvy bit and things. And I've also just provisionally laid that in and adjusted these just to make sure there's enough. And as if you remember, they're offset, so it's really nice and easy to adjust them. The reason I wanted to put that in is I want to work out a spacer. There's the bearing, and that obviously needs to sit this distance, so I need to measure that. I just wanted to check the actual distance before I screwed anything together, so I'll get on and do that. I'm very pleased with this. It needed to be. I did some calculations to make sure my brain wasn't being a muscle, and worked it out that the spacer needed to be 7, and then realised an M4 dome nut. Turn down the end, take about 1 millimetre off, drill out to 4 millimetre, and it works perfectly. I don't know whether you can see, that's it. It's reflected, so it looks like 2 nuts. But that's a dome nut that spaces the bearing just halfway between the front and back of the Scotch oak. Just when you thought you had everything lined up. Got that fixed down, and I've learnt from previous experience, never over tighten the Munson rings on this, even though the acrylic tube is 22mm diameter and Munson rings the same. They're always designed to make it slightly tighter to clamp copper pipes. So if you tighten them really tightly, over months and months, it can slowly deform the acrylic tube until the plunger doesn't work. And I've just tried the plunger in this and it doesn't fit anyway. It gets stuck at this end and at that end. So what I'm going to do is I've made a little jig, as always, so I can grip it in the vise. Just turn that down to 8.5mm, drill the hole through, so I can now clamp that in the vise and take ever such a minuscule amount off this. That's better. I've taken absolute minuscule amount off, but now it evenly slides up and down, which is great. Secret that I have up my sleeve: graphite powder, which you can buy to lubricate locks. Apparently that's what it's used for, but because I don't want to put any synthetic lubrication in here in case it has a long-term effect on the plastic, I'm going to use graphite because that's inert, sort of. That does make it very, very slippery. I've just got to share this with you. It's so exciting. It used to be such a problem because I remember I was saying I didn't want to move the motor too far, and it took so long to set this up, tightening all the screws, fiddling all the layers and everything. But now these two hold it together, and that move it. I've just realised to set this up with the bearings, I've just slid it out of the way. So there's the motor, and I can spin this to my heart's content. And there we have it. No friction. Having these bearings mounted on these offset hexagonal brass rod is great, because to adjust them you can just tweak them ever so slightly until you get them where you want. Put the spanner on, screwdriver on the back, and just tighten them really tightly. The way I found to do it is to get it so that the bottom two bearings just moving, so you know that they're supporting it, not all the time but just moving sufficiently. Make sure this isn't too high so the bearings get stuck at the bottom, so lowered it a little bit. And then once you've got the bottom two bearings done, this will be angled back because it's not balanced. You just tighten the top two ever so gently until they again just turn slightly. You don't want too much pressure, especially with me using that abrasive disc to wheel to sand the bevel on that. If I had a milling machine or something I could do it more accurately, but this is absolutely fine. You can see. Ever the perfectionist, most annoyingly, I've noticed this bearing was a little bit too far back, so I've undone it and put a washer in to bring it forward a bit. I also noticed that this keeps, despite the weight being at the bottom, it keeps sort of leaning back like this. And then I remembered on the design I'd got some card washers, and I vaguely remember putting one under each of these. So here we have it, ready to cut out. I've left a little gap at the top of each one so they don't all fall apart, because I've done that before and you cut them all out and then they all fall through the honeycomb and you lose the whole lot. So doing it this way should work really well. Let's see. And here we have them. Every home should have one, and this is what I mean by leaving a little tab. You can just do that. What a joy, rather than trying to dig around underneath the honeycomb thing. This card is absolutely gorgeous. It's metallic, and it's so metallic it'll bend and actually stay, which is really useful. I've used it to design the steampunk wedding seating things, which this was a prototype. But now it's got different colour gears and things, and the wedding invite, which is nice. That, by the way, is the window where you put the information that you desire to share with your friends. And there's even a little gap at the back, a pocket at the back, to put maps and information in. And it's available as a kit. Never miss an opportunity for some marketing. A kit already made. Thank you very much. Let's test the pitch. Dun, dun, dun. Got these pulleys, and I'll need one of them to be a pulley, basically, which is going to go there. Beep, 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 beep. And obviously it can't be just any pulley, it needs to be a steam head pulley. So it's going to be mounted on an extraordinarily complicated brass thing made of 12mm steel brass rod. I will show you what goes into making something like this. This one has got a smooth brass piece of rod that sticks in the top so it doesn't wear out the middle of this as it turns, which is probably really overkill. I could probably just use a brass screw, but never mind, it needs must and all that. Hopefully you'll be able to see what's going on. So first thing to do, cut two lengths, 35.2mm. 35.2, how ridiculous. So we put a length into the chuck. This end's nice and flat because I parted it off before. Then we use the quick release chuck, which is really good. Every tool just lifts off like that, and we put the parting off tool, which is carefully stored there. Wind that out the way. Slot that in, and the good thing about these quick release chucks is there's a height stop here, so you can, for each tool, you can set it up. Now, I know this isn't quite the right, well, it's not the right way to do it. What is it, 35.2? I'm going to use a ruler. I'm going to go 35.2. Get it roughly right, and then get the spanner from the other side of the room. I'm going to lock the this whole section off. I wonder if I can go back a little bit. Right. Then I'm going to put the ruler up 35.2. That's absolutely spot on actually, but I can now adjust it with this smaller adjuster, which, let's just move all this so you can actually get a better idea. I'll keep the focus on there. Right, so I can adjust it with this. Now, safety goggles, and I'll part that off. Next thing is to drill a 4mm diameter hole 15mm deep into one end. So, centre drill first of all, which is that, so I can find the centre. And I'm just going to touch that on. Now, just to start the hole, I'm going to put the 4mm drill bit in, and there are markings just here, so I'm going to set that to 0 and then slide the whole thing along and just touch it on the end, which you can't see now, and then wind this in until that says 15. Now at the other end it needs to be tapped. That end, M4 thread, doesn't say how long, but I'll go in probably about 15 actually. And this time, because I'm going to put a thread on it, M4 thread, it needs, let me just check if that is M4, yeah, it needs to have a 3.3mm hole. And again, to get it, say 15 deep, lock it off there. Then to tap the thread, we need the M4 tap. I'm not going to drive this in because that would be an absolute disaster. So what you can do is a bit naughty. Start it going, and then you can just look at that. So now that's a threaded M4 hole, which is exciting. Right, next bit. I want actually on this to cut a little decorative slot in that's say 14mm from the end, the other end. So put that way around. Wind that in. Get the ruler. Oops, loosen that. 14. Lock that off again, and this just needs to be about 1 millimetre deep. So to do 1 millimetre, so got that bit machined. That looks very pleasant. And one other thing which I forgot to do is just to put a little bevel on the edges to stop them being sharp. Right, not the proper use for a parting off tool, but it'll suffice. Throw that out of the chuck, that's better. Right, so got nice little bevels and things. Now the next thing, which isn't 4mm, I need to drill and tap a small hole there. I think it's M4, M3 for a, well, I'm not sure, I can tell you. It is M4, 7mm down into the centre. Right. Now I do apologise for proper machinists who will clamp this. I've got a clamp that goes on here, but it gets in the way. So I'm going to do it like that. As I say, I do apologise. Okay, right, now to tap the L. I'm going to tap this with a manual tap wrench. I've put it in the lovely magnetic rubber vice jaws, and then check that it all looks like it's lined up. Not using any thread cutting lubricant because brass is self-lubricating. It's lovely. Right, so that's nice. Woo. And then I'm just going to countersink this end bit a little bit because it makes it look really nice. Now, one thing to be aware of with taps, you can get bullnose taps which the thread cuts much nearer to the end, and you can get different stage taps where you have one that's very angled. I can't see a thing. It's sort of conical, so it gives you a really easy start, a bit like this one. Although I think this is an intermediary one where the thread does cut still fairly quickly. So to cut a long story short, you could use one to start the thread, then use a bullnose one if you haven't got the depth to go past to the thread that you actually want. Whereas with this, I had the hole down here, so by the time that reached there, it had finished cutting all the thread that I require. Right, let's just touch this on. That's very nice, it just gives a lovely little dimple effect. Right, now I need 30mm of chromed steel rod that you get with modelling kits, because that means this spins beautifully. 30mm, now I could cut on that on the lathe, but it's just not worth the aggro because it's so near the centre and it's steel and all sorts of other things. So I think we're going to resort to the hacksaw, or junior hacksaw. Doesn't take long. By the time I'd set the lathe up and everything else, it would have been ages in the future. Now I'm going to use the sanding disc, which I don't usually use other than with metal. It's also very good for if you've cut a bolt or screw down, you can just twist it around on this and it sorts it out. Well, it's just taken the rough ends off. Right, I need to glue an M5 dome nut on to the end of the rods. As I happen to find, it looks nice. It also holds it on. I can also get it off if I need to with the grub screw. And I found that an M5 nut just fits onto M4 rod really nicely. I think this is a job for the wonderful blue tack, or whatever it's called in different countries and things. It's the stuff that you can stick things onto walls with, posters and things. But it is ever so useful as a sort of third hand. And of course I'm going to use super glue. I probably should use epoxy glue or something like that, but I've never had a problem with super glue. It's got all the threads to sort of soak into. You can be quite generous with it, and it sets so hard and fills spaces up. And there you have it, fixed into place. It just looks so nice. Again, proper machined brass with a grub screw facing outwards, and that's screwed on very securely. Oops. With an M4 steel bolt screw and a nice large washer. While I've been doing that, I've also been drilled out these to 5mm and fixed on this lovely proper, I don't know what the expression is, it's not just bent chain, it's actually brazed or endless. It must be brazed or something, because it is ever so strong for the size of it. It's amazing. So I've used this on these machines just to work the bellows and other machines to do other bits and pieces, and I'd fix it onto this drive pulley, little 2mm hole, poke it through, push a little bit of spring steel through, and then glue that in place. While that's all gluing and stuff and drying and setting, we might take the dog for a walk. The fun never stops. While the glue's drying, I'm going to make the pulley puller thing that fixes the chain onto the Cuckoo bellows motor. And I discovered these things. I spent ages trying to find some way of doing it. Rather than making something, I found these. They are model propeller adapters or something. They're a way of fixing propellers onto motors with 2mm spindles. As you can see, they've got a sort of chuck mechanism there. Absolutely perfect, made of aluminium, nice and light. Add a little bit of silver to the mix. So just need to do a little bit of fiddling, cutting them down and stuff, get that done. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention, as you hadn't realised, of course, red pulleys, they have to be red because, as I've said lots of times, zoink, we've got to the red handle, we've got to the red jewel there. I think there's another couple of red bits around, so now there'll be a couple of red bits over this side. You get a spanner on the back bit which has got a little flat on it, so you've got something to tighten against, and you just tighten it. You tighten it a couple of times first, and then that locks it in place. And now you can see where it's going. So it's going down there over the pulley, and then it's going to connect via a spring and things to this so it can open it, not jam the motor shut, not break that really lovely bellows, but just pull and then release it under gravity. So I think that's a job for another day, because to be honest with you, I've talked far too much today, so I'm going to go and do some video editing. Thanks very much for watching. Hope it has been interesting. Hope it has inspired you to start creating your own steampunk or whatever machines and inventions. Remember, if you've liked it, to like it or to subscribe and other stuff like that. Always happy to answer any queries in comments. Thanks very much for watching. See you next time, when hopefully we'll get a motorised bellows.